And I don't think this change is going to create prosperity, just as the one lady said. It creates division. You know, I think this solar proposal actually is a win-win for everyone. And everyone should think that way instead of fighting. You know, that's the real side of me, even though I can be sometimes as mad as my father about everything we've been through. I try not to. I'm a godly man, you know, from that standpoint. So and I think a lot of people know the situations we've been through. And, you know, I'm just pleading to you guys as statespeople or statesmen, I can say that right here, to think about this for the community and make the right decisions in going forward and trying to be progressive for resource users who have created wealth in this country. Just as Tim Sharma said, I appreciate he said about sweet corn there, you know, one seed makes, you know, another 1,600. That's what we've been doing for years to make our living. And what other people use resources that they have to make something that's growing like that? Thank you.
Thank you. Opposed, Greg, sir? Opposed, Greg, sir? Here.
President, council members, thank you for the time. I'm just going to cut right to the chase and read the petitions that we've been passing around Exeter.
Oh, just your name and address for the record.
Oh, sorry. Greg Sear, 35 Estate Drive, Exeter, Rhode Island. And you should probably make sure that everyone does that. I think I was the first one in the last 3 or 4. I understand a lot of the people are more famous in these areas, but anyway, I'm just going to read the top of the petition. We have 268 signatures. I do have a copy that I'll give you. Probably, Lynn, would you like the copy when I'm done reading it? Okay. Yeah, I'm going to keep this short because we're on time limited. Petition to oppose utility scale solar and wind development in the town of Exeter's residential zones. The signees of this petition are registered Exeter voters that oppose the construction of utility scale solar and wind facilities in the town of Exeter's residentially zoned areas. Utility scale solar and wind facilities are constructed primarily to generate and supply utility companies with electricity. The large scale of these facilities is clearly not appropriate in a rural residential zone and is not consistent with the Exeter Comprehensive Plan. That's going to start a little bit, sorry guys, but it is. Wind turbines would be as tall as the largest building in Providence, approximately 10 times the height currently allowed in residential zones. Utility solar developments strip sites of vegetation, remove soil, and level the topography. Utility solar and wind developments have caused serious problems in other towns when located in residential zones. And I just want to say one thing, just for my own thing. We do live in a democratic society. I understand the farmers, they work hard. The non-farmers, we work hard too. But at the end of the day, no matter what's done, we all have to get together. We're all from the same community. So. Yes, sir.
Is that the petition that was collected about 2 or 3 months ago?
Yes, sir. It was the same one with a few extra signatures. You have
I looked at it at the town hall after it was turned in.
Okay.
Who collected the signatures for that?
Many people. I collected them. Neighbors collected them. Other people.
Because without any names on there who collected them, it really has no bearing.
I can get the names for you.
And the other thing, you just stated for the record that it's all Rhode Island, it's Exeter registered voters.
Yes.
When I looked at that, there's one gentleman on there I know, and he lives in Cranston.
If you want to do an omnibus, please feel free. I'm glad you get you the names of the people who collected it. Yes,
I would like that for the record, please.
I will get it for you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. In favor, Martha Stamp.
My name is Martha Stamp, and I'm the elder of the Stamp family.
Your address, Karen?
My address is 49 Bedford Drive in South Kingstown. I'm here in full support of my brother, his wife, my nephew, his wife, my other nieces and nephews the great nieces and nephews, and the great nieces and nephews. What I have witnessed all my adult life is not a trust in the very government that we started with in Cranston. 53 years I waited for my brother and sister-in-law to get help. Now I am hoping that you all understand that helping farmers in Exeter is very important, because pretty soon they're going to hammer you from the planning department for affordable housing. Believe me, it will come down here. I'm watching South Kingstown. Tomorrow night, there's a planning board meeting, and if there's anybody they don't want to see, it's me. Because I just landed, I land on things only by accident. It seems like God has been with me for a long time. But when we trusted the government in Cranston, we didn't realize, I mean, my dad was making $9,000 maybe luckily a year in the egg business. We worked, my brother, my mother, my father, and I. And when I didn't want to go out to work, my mother was the ruling force. She said, you get out there. Okay, what it's done for me. And I'll just give me the time sign, because I'm used to that from other people, right? So, what was I getting at now? And this is the last I'm going to say. I'm still working. I'm 81. I work a 40-hour week. I have one, and it's full-time. I have health care where I work. They're good to me. And I tell you what, if old people would work a little bit longer, they would live a little bit longer. My late mother died at almost 99. Now, the hearing goes, the eyes are a little tough, and the walking, well, I'm getting around. So give us some really good help, because it's very important for the next generations. And I've been to many DEM meetings, and they want to get young people into farming. Well, why in God's name do you want to take a legitimate farmer and give it to somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing? Look, we had a farm up at up in Cranston, where the training, we had a state farm up there, but you're probably all too young. Probably everybody is younger than I, because I'm always the oldest one. But I tell you what, keep that brain a-working, and God bless you all, and I sincerely hope you all make the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Opposed? Victor Boga.
I love you.
PIGOGA.
Yes, sir. Tough act to follow, I'll say that much. Victor Bigoga, 88 Brook Ridge Drive. See if we can get this, Exeter, Rhode Island.
Thank you.
All right. So, good evening, council members. Thank you for your service. As I'm sure this is very much a thankless role, and you guys work very hard at it. So, I do trust that you will do the right thing, and I think we'll go through a few of the reasons. So, for more than 15 years, or more than 15 years ago, rather, I came before this council to speak of the detrimental effect of the Rhode Island Economic Development Council's plan to turn the former lad school property into an extensive business center that really would have changed the landscape of this town permanently. Like the ordinance being discussed today, it was poorly planned and would have created many unforeseen problems that had not been considered. Just to give a little background, I am an environmental advocate, and a firm believer that industrial pollution and greenhouse gases are having an adverse impact on our planet. Although not an expert, such as the ones that green development has brought forth, I have a degree in fisheries biology, I have a master's degree in finance, and for work I negotiate $100 million, $200 million contracts. So I work with language on a regular basis. Most importantly, when my daughter was 11, I gave her a copy of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring that talks about the impact of DDT. So I'm not new, and it's something I firmly believe in. And I think that book really talks about what ends up happening if you do things without proper planning. And we saw the impact of DDT. And I'm sure many of our farmers here can speak to it as well. Although presented as an environmentally friendly organization pursuing sustainable energy, green development is a business with a goal to generate sustainable revenue. Green development owner Mark D. Pasquale and employees have donated $70,000 to members of the General Assembly, their committee, and Governor Raimondo since 2013, with $9,000 to Nicholas Mattiello and $6,800 to Dominic Ruggiero. Is it any wonder that Ruggiero supported a bill that would permit a green development wood-burning facility near the central landfill under the guise of a renewable energy project? Yes, profits are important, but not at the expense of the health of our citizens. I assume any council member who has received a contribution from green development will abstain from voting this evening, because that would be a direct conflict of interest. I support wind and solar as renewable energy, but I'm firmly against this ordinance and ask that this council vote against it so that a proper and comprehensive plan can be put in place that will benefit all landowners and town residents instead of green development and a small group of Exeter residents. Why? There is no stipulation for how a solar array would be decommissioned, as I don't believe requiring a decommissioning plan has any teeth. You can drive a truck right through that. There are no limits to the scale and size of the industrial solar panel developments within the ordinance, which is in sharp contrast to the 15% of acreage recommended by the planning board. There are no documented payments in the ordinance. I'm sure green development has excellent ethics, but one would never negotiate the revenue after a contract has been signed. Would you hire a contract to perform work and then agree on the charges 30 days later? Wouldn't you just do the right thing? It's plain and simple. It's very obvious. Although green development's lawyers stated that they were tweaking the rules, this isn't the case. They're requesting to be exempted from the rules through bypassing special permits for 15 lots. And again, the concept that additional landscape buffers may be required couldn't be further watered down. One landowner for whom I have tremendous respect said that green development could be trusted. You decide, you be the judge. There is one statement from the Green Development Council, Mr. Mancini, which I firmly agree with, and that is, I know it when I see it. He used that term, he actually said, you know it when I see it, in the last meeting. Well, I believe that Supreme Court Justice Porter Stewart, who coined this phrase in 1964, would agree that this amendment is economic pornography that should be set aside so that a proper plan can be put in place that is in alignment with the Exeter Comprehensive Plan as recommended by our Exeter Planning Board. As you drive home tonight, enjoy what is left of the smooth roads, as I can guarantee that the cuts into the pavement to install the required underground cabling will certainly generate more potholes for us to drive over as we enjoy the beautiful solar panel landscape. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
In support, Jennifer Curry.
Good evening. This is very hard. There we go. Good evening, Jennifer Curry from 5. Thank you. Oh, perfect. 510 River Hill Road, West Greenwich. You may be wondering why I'm here. Besides being a neighboring town, my in-laws, Mort and Sylvia Curry, live in Exeter, longtime residents, and my husband and I have 7 boys. There's a high chance that one of our 7 boys will end up at Mehmet Pepe's house, and I'd like to try to protect their rights as future landowners in Exeter. It is my understanding that the town council remains neutral on this issue until all testimony is heard. In keeping with that, I'd like to believe in good faith that you, Mr. Ellis, would not read only one letter in opposition to solar development. I'd like to request that the letters from Mr. Whitford and Mr. and Mrs. Palmer be read aloud as well. I think it's only fair to the public. One letter was picked, and it should be all sides heard. I'd also like to ask, are zoning changes being made, or is there opportunity for a change if the landowner chooses? Anyone answer that? Are zoning changes being made, forced upon the landowner, or are there opportunities if they choose to have that?
On the proposal before us tonight,
Correct.
what it is, when you look at the zoning matrix, it's changing the use from a special use to a yes in the RU3 and the 4.
But they don't have to.
No,
They don't have to have a special use.
from what I understand, when this proposal first came before us, and some members of the planning board were saying you opened up 12,000 acres to development.
Correct.
And from my understanding of the situation between the applicant and the planning board, they asked him to narrow it down, be more specific. He did that. And that's how this came about. And they're spelling out, is it 15 lots?
15 lots,
15?
correct.
Yeah.
15% of the 15 lots.
And when it started in October, I got this question's gonna come up later. I don't know if we're gonna finish this tonight. What we've been told is there's gonna be a brand new substation built at St. Joseph's Cemetery across the street. They have to run all new infrastructure underground to the substation at Walmart. The thing is, with any of these solar farms, you're gonna have the infrastructure in place to take the juice.
Correct.
And like Mail Road, Hopkins Hill Road, if anybody wanted to build one up there, they would have to put in the 3-phase power. And from what I'm hearing from electrical engineers, it's running $220,000 to $250,000 a mile for wire. So, and when I was looking at this briefly, and
So in other words, Mr. Peck can keep his land just as it's being used.
no one's
thing
no
is-
one's being forced to build solar farms in their
They're not being
property.
forced to change, but the change affects them.
It's another option that can be done with their land.
So it's giving them an opportunity if they should so choose.
And if it was viable to do it economically viable.
Okay.
Because, this is from National Grid too, the cost to run that infrastructure down Route 102 and upgrade the 2 substations is $17.3 million that the developer has to pay, not National Grid.
And so those panels that Mrs. Kennedy was showing around the room, did Green Development install those panels?
From what I understand, I can't remember the name of the company. It's the
Was
gentleman
it Green
that.
Development? It was not Green Development, okay.
Okay, let me
And
just
so-
finish this last question. I know the one at the post office. and the
I
one-
don't care who did it, I just want to know, was it this
I
developer?
can't remember the name of the company. The gentleman that built it, the guy that represented the company was Frank Epps, and I believe the company is based in Germany, because I went to one of the planning board meetings out of interest, because I live next to the one at the post office, 600 foot away, and you don't even know it's there.
So is the planning board responsible to make sure buffers are in place?
It would have been part of the process to get the final approval.
So the planning board is responsible to put those buffers in place? Okay. And I have two more things I want to point out here. The 268 petitions that were collected and signed, you said it, that was months ago. That was based on the 12,000 acres, not the 15 parcels.
I would have to look at the time frame. I can't.
So it's a little fear mongering possibly. Okay. And lastly, the 19-page report, that, can that be put online?
It's a public record, you can go in and request.
You can request it using a public records request.
Okay.
I don't think they would need a public record request, would they?
Yeah, they would. It's a,
Yeah, because it's to the council, you would ask, it's an inter-office memo. So you
I just
have
think
to
it's
have-
silly to have it printed up over and over and over again. That, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike DeFrancisco again.
Mike, you live in Exeter?
Mike DeFrancisco, 87 Hallville Road, Exeter. In the interest of expediency to move this thing along, what I'd like to do is just depart from the script and leave this as a record, because while I'm opposed to the particular action here tonight with the zoning amendment, I'm not opposed to solar energy development in town. I think it can be profitable if it's controlled and done in accordance with the rules and regulations that we have. So with your permission, I'd like to just hand this in.
That's appreciated, thank you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of arguments that you've heard 10 times already tonight about why you shouldn't do it. And I'd like to just introduce some new things. I don't envy the council sitting there having to make this decision. But my understanding is that after the hearing closes, you should have approximately 45 days in which to vote.
That is correct.
And I'd like to put some other information on the floor or on the table about other things that you should consider, and also for the audience, that I believe we have right now solar ordinance number 8, or revision number 8, sitting there since April that the planning board has proposed. And to me, it answers so many of these questions here tonight. It has something for everybody. Large landowners, small landowners, different neighborhoods, different size solar projects, not just the large solar project. But yet, it hasn't received the hearing. Nobody knows about it, or at least it seems nobody knows about it. But it's been lurking in the shadows, so to speak, for a couple of months that we know of. And I would urge the council to, before you vote on this particular zoning amendment as the subject of this hearing, that you at least consider or make public what ordinance number 8 or solar number 8 entails. Because I think what it will do is provide the alternative and a lot of the solutions that will satisfy so many people. You know, I don't think it'll polarize the town the way we see some people polarizing. The other thing that I wanted to bring up that's new, if you haven't heard, is right now we have solar siting guidance information, a public draft that the state has published, and I got a copy in my email. And there's a group of many stakeholders up at the state. This will be coming down. They've scheduled 3 public hearings, 2 in July and 1 in August, in which they're soliciting public input. I have to put my glasses on for this one. It's 30 pages of general guidance for communities that are considering solar projects. And just to pick on some of them, one is they're urging communities, or they will be urging communities, to consider solar context in the legal setting for the projects. And they go into things like considering the Comprehensive Planning and Land Use Regulation Act, the Rhode Island Land Development and Subdivision Review Enabling Act, the Zoning Enabling Act, and a Comprehensive Energy Conservation, Efficiency, and Affordability Act. Another slide, another page that they have is the solar context has to be considered within land use regulations and comprehensive plans. We've heard the comp plan referred to so many times. Just picking out a couple of bullets, and I know I want to be brief, be relevant, and then be seated in that order. It is to promote safe development of solar energy and that minimizes impacts to land uses, properties, and the environment. So that's tied into a lot of the comments we had. To consider, the community should consider in its ordinances where the various types of systems would be appropriate in the community. And I think that's one of the larger questions you have tonight, is the appropriateness of locating some of these larger commercial industrial applications in residential zones. And I understand that land use in the residential zones can include farming. So we're not talking about the land uses on top, but the underlying zoning. There's the rub there. The other one is within land use regulation and zoning ordinances, they will be urging the towns to craft carefully the requirements to balance avoiding, and this is their language, creating barriers to solar development and ensuring protection from potential impacts. They want to make sure no barriers are put up to that, and we should be careful about that. And one last point, they want the town to be able to consider within the context of the zoning ordinances and land use regulations, other related state laws, which include building code standards that should not be in a zoning ordinance or a solar ordinance. The consideration for statewide solar building and electrical permits, there's another whole permitting layer there. Statewide fire code variants and taxation of farms within the Farm, Forest, and Open Space Act. And the last remark I want to make is, who put all this together and who's sending it down the pipe, so to speak, to the town? When the stakeholder group, if I can find it here, has a lot of people we would recognize, including the Governor's Office of Energy Resource, statewide planning, Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, Rhode Island Builders Association, Green Energy, Automobile Society, Grow Smart. So there's a lot of varied stakeholders, and they've come up with this document that I think the town council should be aware of, consider, as well as solar ordinance number 8, before you vote on this particular amendment tonight. And I'll be seated.
One question, Mike. Can you get copies of that and send to the council so we could have that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact.
And with the dates of their public hearings?
Sure. We've got this on our agenda at the planning board tomorrow night, because I want the planning board to also look at it, but it'd be good to get comments.
If they
from
can
everybody.
email us copies tomorrow with them public hearing dates, because I'd be interested in looking at that, possibly if I can fit it in notable, so.
Sure. In the interest of expediency.
Next, we have Greg Olson.
Could I ask a question, please, as long as Dan had the opportunity? I'd just like to speak to what the chair of our planning board has just mentioned. And for those of you that have an agenda, and I see there are many copies, you probably didn't pick one up, but on page 5 of tonight's agenda, which we may well not be able to cover, under unfinished business, item E, is the introduction, consideration, and possible action, proposed amendment to section 11.1 solar. That is the draft 8 to which the chair of the planning board has referred. It's been here once before. I moved to have it heard. It didn't happen. There wasn't a second. I'm hoping soon that we can hear this, as the chair of the planning board suggested. I'm not sure we're going to get to this business tonight, but it's here on the agenda. That's what we should all be looking for, because it has a variety of uses allowed in sections without, they're yeses for utility scale, not big ones, small scale.
Mr. Ellis, I'd like to just for the record state, we discussed this at last month's meeting when we were running late. And last month was the first time this was on the agenda, and you agreed with me that we would not have time to advertise for a public hearing tonight. So that's just for the record.
And I made a motion before, but never mind, it's no point, no point. We're on two sides of the issue.
Okay, Greg Allen.
My name is Greg Allen, 11 Raymond Lane, Exeter. Before I start, boys, I'd like to just respectfully suggest that in light of the crowd here tonight, there was mass majority was here for this
To
effort.
your point, so we can get through it, Greg, thank you.
You got my point? All right. Okay, I'm a believer in rural Exeter. I firmly believe in it. I've lived all my life, and I enjoy just as much, if not more, than you guys do, living in fields and woodlands and all those things. And I'd like to say, my experience in the past in Exeter, the town offices, the town councils, the planning boards, the zoning boards, planning boards, seem to take the tact of taking advantage of certain institutions to maintain our rurality. And one of those was in the formative years, it was called Green Acres. And then it came to conservation commissions that were set up by the state and funded, in which they took extremely large tracts of property. I'm not talking about farmland, I'm talking about woodland. Thousands upon thousands of acres. And land turned over to the state in the Arcadia, on that western end of Exeter. A lot of town tax land went to the state. And these boards and the townspeople seemed to think that that was the thing to do. And maybe it was. But you have to realize that they were taken off the tax rolls. And our taxes go up. And they don't just go up as a shadow, they go up direct. That's what they lose. And they also lose the future value of that land where it could be worth more. And I'm also told that in some cases, that land is returned to the owners. And it's not forever conservation land. It goes back to their heirs. It might be 50, 75, or 100 years. That's what I'm told. Maybe somebody here can answer that. So in those things in light, and as a taxpayer, I know it's difficult to pay my taxes here. We're now faced with a new land use. And it's a challenge, there's no doubt about it. But it offers vast opportunities for towns like ours. When you look at this type of use, it seems to me that there's very little long-time hurt done to the property itself. And if there is some, it's not paved over. The soil is still there. And yes, the land does go back to the original owners. It will. Maybe in 20 years, solar will be not here anymore. But then it'll be back on the tax rolls. It'll always be on the tax rolls. So I'm a proponent of solar. Gentlemen, ladies, I'm a big proponent of this type of thing. I say to the council, and you're all pretty smart guys, I know every one of you, and I think that, you know, if there's a problem with the numbers, check with other towns. See what they're getting. Check it out, do a parity. And if there's a problem mechanically, for instance, may I ask when that picture was taken on that?
No, sir.
Well, I can say I was there last fall and I was doing a cottontail rabbit count and there was plenty of grass there. Now whether there's there now or not, probably not. Pictures don't lie, I guess. But maybe that could have been solved if fescues were planted. I spent my life doing that type of thing. That could have been an answer. They stand droughts, they live in sandy soils. Those little things, that goes to your planning board. So I'm kind of mimicking Mike, but that's how I feel very strongly. You know, I think you should, if the land is too big, if it's 800 acres or 1,000 acres, pare it down, do it in sections, and then learn as you go. But my bottom line is, give them the tools to work with. He's already tried, and in view of the situation, I think you should get it done.
Thank you. I'll invite the public. We do only have 20 minutes before we have to vacate the building, so please keep your comments brief and succinct. Next, we have Tom McMillan.
Tom McMillan, 20 Cobblestone Hill Road in Exeter. I'm not going to tell you my age, but I'll say, Martha, I'm older than you are, so you don't get the prize tonight. I'm concerned that all we hear about solar is the only way you can have solar is with green development. The only way you can have farms is with solar. I don't think either of those are true. I think it's unthinkable. I can't imagine that our council would surrender the responsibility for creating the town's ordinances, turn them over to a self-centered developer. I can't imagine that. I believe the town itself will find that impossible to accept. What do you gain? A bunch of utopian promises? Who knows? Most of us are old enough to know that be very wary when people promise you the moon. I think Mike Cerullo commented that the proposal restricts the zoning board. In fact, what it does is take the zoning board completely out of the picture. Denies the zoning board any voice in that. And that's a board in town that represents the citizens, assures that public property values are protected, and gives the people a chance to be heard. That's the only place that can happen. I think it's very deliberate that that has been excluded in this proposal. You don't want to deal with the zoning board. Seems we're opposed to reasonable plans and proposals and drafts coming from the planning board. You have to wonder why. I would prefer to trust the planning board than I would a self-centered developer. Let me ask this. If this were approved, what do you tell the next dozen applicants? What are they going to do? They're not included in this ordinance, so what are they going to do? I think it's a very valid question and a very valid concern. After all, we hear that a good solar ordinance is a win-win. That's very true. I've heard no one here tonight that's opposed to solar. I've heard no one here tonight that's opposed to farms. I think it's a fallacy to say that everybody that's opposed to green development right and its own rules is opposed to farms. That's not the case. I urge you to defeat this proposal.
Thank you. In support, Jim Titus.
Jim Titus, West Greenwich, Rhode Island. I just want to make a statement. I concur with the people in support of this project, with the landowners and farmers in this town. Thank you.
Can you state your street address for the record?
West Greenwich, 160 Liberty Hill Road, West Greenwich, Rhode Island. Thank you.
In opposition, Paul
Pelletier. He's had a medical emergency and had to leave.
Okay.
Could I ask a real quick question?
It's brief.
Yeah, people that don't have standing in Exeter, are they allowed?
It's still allowed.
So I can go to North Kingston?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Next, Harold Blair.
Gentlemen, Hal Blair, 44 State Drive, Exeter. Just a couple of, this is going to be quick and sweet. That notification sent out by Green Development was a joke, and everybody knows that. I think farmers should have, and do have the right, to put solar on their existing working farms. But the problem I have with this, if they get in here with solar panels, what's to stop windmills to come in? We don't want that. We should support the planning board's green development's proposal. And let's not sell Exeter for a shiny quarter that might not even be real. Thank you.
Thank you. In support, R. Flischstein. You left? All right. Asa Davis. Asa. I speak like George Bush, I just make up my own pronunciation. I'm sorry.
You're not the first person to do that. Asa Davis, 146 Beechwood Hill Trail, Exeter, Rhode Island. I've been an Exeter resident since I was 9 years old, and I understand that land that I own falls on the list of potential parcels for this zoning change. This land, incidentally, has been clear-cut multiple times in past decades and past generations, and it always seems to come back. I worked on my first solar project when I was 14 years old, putting panels on my grandfather's roof. Over the last few decades as a mechanical engineer, I've helped design and build renewable energy and distributed generation projects from 100 kilowatts to 20 megawatts in California, Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut. In general, I think solar power is a good thing, and solar systems make good neighbors. They're quiet, they don't pollute, they don't burn fossil fuels, they don't generate traffic. For the most part, they just sit motionless, quietly doing their thing. solar projects should be encouraged as compared to alternative uses. As a landowner and resident, I think this proposal is an improvement to the current town's solar ordinance, and that it's clearer, more sensible, and more straightforward than the draft 8 alternative from the planning board. I don't think necessarily that it's a good thing for the town as it's currently written, however, for a couple reasons. First, in my projects, I've seen 2 or 3 times where utility substations were closed or relocated during the project construction. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. That's a utility decision. They get to decide how to run their network and how to run their systems. If the utility decided to close the Lafayette substation, Exeter has 0 say in that decision. It doesn't make sense for our code to be based on something completely under control of others that may or may not be there in the future. Next, the state of Rhode Island has a program called RE Growth, which is currently running, which encourages small-scale solar projects such as might be appropriate for a homeowner's backyard. It doesn't make sense for these projects, which are easier for the utility to connect and administer than a large-scale project, to require more extensive examination and review at the town level than a large-scale project does. It doesn't make sense to require an underground connection to a house for a solar system when the utility connection is most likely overhead. This puts these small projects at a significant disadvantage, even though they will likely mostly connect to the same substation. And finally, the zoning code shouldn't play favorites. It should apply equally to everybody in town. The town council and the planning board should be looking out for the interests of everyone, not just a select few. When this type of thing happens at the national level, it's called crony capitalism. That might be business as usual in DC, but I'd like to think our town council and our planning board can perform to a higher standard and set a better example. In my view, it would be fine to leave things as they are, or put an S or a Y in either of the boxes on the zoning table, but it should be the same for everybody. There shouldn't be any asterisks or special terms.
Thank you. In opposition, May Kerr. No? Robert F.
Fairbanks?
Huh?
Fairbanks?
Sure.
Actually, gave a short presentation. I'll keep it short. My wife and I are residents of 42 Cobblestone Hill Road in Exeter. We are opposed to the industrial solar electric power plant that is being proposed on the property behind our house. That is referred to as the WED Ridge Solar Site by the developer. This site is currently zoned RU4, which alone, in my opinion, should prohibit the construction of an industrial level power plant. I'm also a licensed professional engineer with 34 years of experience in civil engineering, and as such, I'd like to be recognized by the council as an expert in matters related to civil engineering. My wife and I, as direct abutters and 32-year Exeter residents, asked the council to deny the developer's proposed zoning amendment as it's associated to this proposed power plant projects across the town. We understand, and I will not go into it, but obviously the planning board and the zoning board have rendered their opinions and they are against this. From an engineering standpoint, I have several potential issues, and with the zoning change amendment as it's being proposed, the zoning board appears to be taken out of the process, and it appears as though the planning board will have a limited input. And as such, there are a number of issues that really need to be addressed and that the planning board would typically address during the design process. These, the least of which include, or not the least of which include runoff. And runoff, we're talking about a proposed solar facility behind my house that's going to be on 118 acres with 70,000 solar panels. You basically have 50% impervious coverage from the panels on that property. So drainage is a huge hurdle. There was a facility recently constructed in Richmond that has caused significant flooding. And I've attached the article to that. I won't go into the specifics, but if drainage is not properly addressed here during the design process, we could have issues on 102. The site behind my house is 100 feet higher than the elevations on 102. So water is going to tend to run towards 102 as well as towards our properties in the back. Impacts, erosion controls, all of this, and I'll just highlight them, all should be addressed during the design process. If an industrial level power plant like this is ultimately considered and approved, we need topography on the site, we need to understand how these panels are anchored, the foundation types, we need to understand existing soil and groundwater. Everybody in Exeter is on a well, including us. Anything that's going to impact that well, are they going to clean these panels over time? Where are they going to get the water from? Do they use soap? Do they use any kind of chemicals that could potentially impact our water supply? Details on the panels. How high are they? Are there going to be landscape buffers? Now, we've been told there may be landscape buffers, but nothing requires that. The sites that we see that have been constructed, the ones on Route 2 in Richmond, you can see the solar panels. They are not screened. The one on Route 3 is not screened. There is no buffer. We need large evergreens to be able to screen the area. Just as a comparison, I was interested, there's another large power plant that's being proposed.
Can you keep it to the ordinance before us?
I will. This deals with the ordinance. We're talking about basically impacting 118 acres on the one site behind my house to make basically 0.17 megawatts per acre. Just as a comparison, not as a vote of confidence or approval for them, the Burrillville site is a 1,000 megawatt site on 67 acres. That makes 90 times more power, and it makes it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I've got other issues here that might not necessarily be engineering related, but that should be looked into as part of the approval process. Are there any fire hazards associated with these? Online, there are lots of articles about fires started at solar facilities, either due to sparking or due to grasses. If there was a fire, can it be safely fought? Are there going to be any toxic chemicals or fumes that are going to get into the air that could impact the immediate residents? Hazardous waste issues. The panels themselves are mostly plastic or glass, but they do have hazardous materials as part of them. They have lead, chromium, cadmium. You know, all of these are shown to leach into the groundwater. I don't know how they're encapsulated in the panels or if it's just a problem when you dispose of them at the end in a landfill, but that needs to be understood. The solar facility is good for 25 years, and then they will decommission it. You know, at the time that they decommission it, a lot of these power plants rely heavily on some kind of government subsidy. If that government subsidy goes away and the entity goes out of business, who is responsible for the removal and disposal of all the panels that are on these private properties? And will a bond be placed by the developer to ensure the removal of the panels and all of the equipment at the end of the life cycle? Loss of habitat. It's a 118-acre parcel behind my house, completely forested and grass. There's a lot of deer back there, other wildlife. They're all going to be displaced. When they put these facilities in, they can't have people wandering around, obviously. So they're fenced in completely, no access. So any large animals will not be able to get in there. Butterflies and the birds, if the grasses grow, yes. Negative impacts to property values. Now, there's a lot of information online about the visual pollution from these, especially if they're not properly screened. So we expect it to be a negative impact to our property values. And we want to know what the council is going to do to protect us and protect our property values. Safety lighting. I don't know if it's proposed. There aren't a lot of plans as a part of this. There's one plan that's been submitted, but there are no lights in the town of Exeter. I like it that way. We've been here for 34 years. The last thing I need is an orange glow behind my house at night from safety lights. So again, something that should be looked into. The last point, and it was part of the developer's initial presentation, is I understand they're doing their own engineering. All right, I was appointed by the governor from 2000 to 2010, the Rhode Island Professional Engineering Board. That's the board that oversees all engineers in the state of Rhode. So I'm an emeritus member of that board now. in order to do engineering, perform engineering, or offer to perform engineering in the state of Rhode Island, you have to have a licensed professional engineer, and you have to have a certificate of authorization, a COA. Green Development, as of today, on the state's website, does not have a COA. So if they're presenting plans to this board, engineering designs, opinions, they're in direct violation of the state law. So, again, I urge the council to defeat this zoning amendment, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Howard Allen? Okay. All right. In opposition then, Andrew Titus.
Thank you. I'll try to be very quick.
For the record, my name is Andrew Teitz, T as in Thomas, E-I-T-Z. I'm an attorney with offices at 2 William Street in Providence, Rhode Island. And I'm here today representing the corporate entity of Weehoo's Farm LLC, which you know better as Stephanie Danforth Chafee, who owns 5 lots comprising almost 1,000 acres in Exeter, and which is located very near several of these sites. I do want to just disclose that some years ago I actually represented Mr. DePasquale in support of one of his wind turbine projects in North Kingstown. And in fact, I also represent a company called Megawatt Energy, which presented a solar proposal to the town of Exeter back in March. Although I had nothing to do with it, I do represent them. So basically what I want to say is I have a confession. My name is Andy, and I support solar and wind. However, I don't support this ordinance. I think this is a terrible ordinance from a land use, legal, and planning perspective. You've heard from a lot of people. Basically what this does is it gives a blank check to the developer. It takes away all the controls that you would otherwise have. It singles out 15 lots for spot zoning. It has improper notice by including the developer's propaganda with it. And it does away with the special use permit for the zoning district where you have it now, and then allows it as a right in another district, and then takes away any control. They told you, oh, don't worry, the planning board, it'll go back to the planning board for the whole process as a major land development project, but it's taken away all the control of the planning board to put in landscape buffers. You also heard about the state guidelines, and I provided to your earlier witness, so you all have a copy of something I was going to provide to you anyway with the date of the hearings. And I would also like to provide, I have one copy with me of the actual draft. And while waiting here, I have emailed it to your town clerk so that she can then email to the council members. You asked for a copy of the actual draft from the state. There are guidelines there. And if you notice the schedule which you've already received, it's a pretty fast track. They're talking about November to have the final guidelines and model ordinances here. So I would say, and I know it's late, so I'm going to kind of wrap this up quickly. I do want to say there's someone right behind me. There's, on behalf of Ms. Chafee, and we have an expert to talk about some of the planning. We have a written report, so we don't have to take a lot of your time. But this is the kind of ordinance that gives renewable energy a bad rap. When something like this is tried to put in and take away all the regulation and just give a blank check and no control at all, that's what happens. You have literally hundreds of people who come out and are opposed to it because there's no proper planning and regulatory process. You can't just say, oh, we have too many impediments to this, so we're just going to take away everything. You see what you have here. You have a backlash. It's like a reflex reaction. Well, if the doctor whacks your knee with that little hammer, you're gonna get a kick. So that's what you've got here, and I would urge you to deny this ordinance, go forward with that solar number 8 that's pending before you, or postpone the whole thing out until November when the state comes in, and do it right. If I could I want to just submit a couple of things as exhibits, one of which is copies of the enclosures with the notice. I've got copies for you. I'm calling that the second item because the first item was the Division of Planning, their information and guidance development timeline. Next item I'd like to submit is Mr. Peter Friedrich's resume. Again, I have 8 copies.
Will this be brief? Can he start speaking now? We do need to start moving this along.
Absolutely, and that's why I want to just get it in writing. Here's a copy of his report as well. And I'll stop.
Thank you.
Go right to him. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Briefly, please.
Good evening. My name is Peter Friedrichs. I reside at 150 Brigham Street in Providence, Rhode Island. Sorry. My name is Peter Friedrichs. It's spelled on the information that was submitted. My address is 150 Brigham Street in Providence, Rhode Island. So at the request of Mr. Tights and his client here, I did review information that was provided to us through an AFRO request, as well as the Town of Exeter zoning ordinance, its land development and subdivision regulations, and its comprehensive plan. I think that the planning board and their staff and town planner has done a phenomenal job in reviewing this proposed zoning ordinance. They've done a lot of work that I think is top-notch with regard to development of a competing ordinance amendment regarding solar production. I think in summary of what I reviewed, Exeter is really at the forefront in terms of how it's looking at this, and there needs to be a policy decision. There's been recommendations made by the appointed boards. There's an elected council here that will make a policy decision. From a professional process standpoint, the ordinance that was being discussed right now in public hearing does not provide really the opportunity for public involvement in creating a document that sets a vision for the community, which is what a zoning ordinance is intended to do. I added a few considerations on top of the planning board's recommendation that I hope the council takes note of. I hope that clarifies a little bit some of the issues that are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Kelly Moore. Kelly?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. I was here the last time. I represent Frank DiGregorio. I'm an attorney with offices in Cumberland, Rhode Island. I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I agree with everything. You keep hearing the same things over and over. One of the most important issues here tonight is that this ordinance is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Importantly, what you didn't hear from the applicant's expert is that it is consistent with your comprehensive plan. That's really important. So you've just heard from Mr. Friedrichs, who's telling you it's not consistent. You've heard from your own planning board, which is the expert in interpreting your comprehensive plan. Andy Tights is a certified planner as well. I'm a former planner. Everyone's telling you, including Mr. Lombardo, who represents the applicant, this is not consistent with your comprehensive plan. That is the one thing that on appeal a court is going to look at. So, you know, that is the most important thing that you should be considering tonight. The other very important issue that I see over and over, the applicant has submitted at least 3, I heard 4 applications to the planning board. I think it's 3, but it might be 4. So there are 3 or 4 projects pending before the planning board. I just want to submit to you a copy. I only have a couple of copies. But it's a copy of the state, a portion of the State Enabling Act. that talks about precedence of approvals. And that requires, it's just word for word, where an applicant requires both planning board approval and council approval for a zoning ordinance or zoning map change, the applicant shall first obtain an advisory opinion on the zoning change from the planning board, as well as conditional planning board approval for the first stage of approval for the proposed project. Then obtain a conditional zone change from you, the town council, and then return to the planning board for subsequent required approvals. Mr. Tights just told you, this ordinance waters down the process. It's not appropriate, and that's another issue on appeal. There's clearly 3 projects pending. So they can say that there's no projects, but there's 15 sites that are proposed by Green Development. You know they're going to propose solar projects. They need to go to the planning board first. The other thing that you've heard tonight is, I call them practical matters. This zoning ordinance does not require Green Development to pay an extra $2,000 per megawatt for taxes. It doesn't require them to give you $377,000 for each, and I don't even know, is it for each project? Is it for the whole 15 properties? Because we don't even know that. So you don't have that in writing. Once this thing is approved, you lose that negotiation, as one of your residents told you. You're done. 30 days from now, they can start pulling permits. So, you know, I've already given you, I have a problem with notice again. The zoning map that they included was not proper. The propaganda piece misleads anyone who received it. So we have that issue as well. You have a lot of problems with this ordinance. I would implore you to accept and review and consider and let the public see amendment number 8 from the planning board, and wait until the state comes through with their comprehensive review of solar in Rhode Island. That's all these people are asking you to do, is to wait, do this right. Everyone will get their projects done, but it'll be done properly. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last person. Louis, you still here? Nope. All right, that's everybody, guys.
All right, at this time, we wish to close the public hearing.
All right, there's a motion to close public hearing. I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. As it is now well past 11 o'clock, we have 45 days at this point to make a decision on the ordinance. Do we wish to make that vote now, or do we want to postpone it till we hear the other ordinance for number 8? Correct. All right. So I'll move that we stop the meeting at this point before we take any votes. I move that we continue everything to next week, providing this room is available. Next one, so moved. Sorry. Any discussion from the council?
Just understood, we'll begin right here.
Exactly right here.
Right here. We'll move forward.
Okay.
So everybody understands, that will be the town council to deliberate and to potentially render a decision at that time. There'll be no further public input at that point, so you're all welcome to attend and to listen, but not to participate at that point.
All right, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.